Hello, we have with us Dr. Aparna Pande, who is the director of Hudson Institute's initiative on the future of India and South Asia. She's an expert on South Asia, foreign policy, and defense strategy. Dr. Pande has recently released her book, Making India Great, The Promise of a Reluctant Global Power. And I'll be talking with Dr. Pande about her insights. I'm Jayshal Sood, managing editor of the American Bazaar. Dr. Pande, welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Jayshal. A pleasure to be here.
First and foremost, tell me about the phrase reluctant global power.
What it basically means is that Indian leaders have always believed that India will be a great power one day or a global power one day. There are many who believe India is already one. There are others who hope it will be very soon. But what does it mean to be a great power or a global power? It means at some level being able to convince another country to do something without having to resort to coercive action. It means playing sort of being recognized by your peers and your rivals as a country which has hard power, economic, military. It also means projecting power in your neighborhood and beyond. India, while it has built economic power and it has military power and it believes it should be a global great power, I believe the country and its leaders are still reluctant to either project power in their neighborhood or beyond, or undertake all those policies that will actually make India a great power soon. There is a belief that we are a great power and we'll become one, we really don't need to do anything. Or that the world will recognize us simply because we are a 5,000-year-old civilization. So there's a reluctance to undertake policies, and there's a reluctance to project power, and there's a reluctance to understand what is power in this day and age.
I know in your book you have mentioned several strengths that India has. Now you have mentioned about the country's reluctance, but elaborate a little bit more. What is stopping India to manifest itself as one of the global powers?
I would say, a few India has a lot of potential in many areas, but challenges as well, from social and political challenges to economic and human capital, challenges in the military arena and the foreign policy, and in what people refer to as grand strategy. At the end of the day, what does a country want to become, and how does it reach the goal that it seeks? So if we start off with, the social challenges. The modern Indian state is 72 years old, even though India is a 5,000-year-old civilization. And over the centuries, and especially the last few decades, the Indian civilization has had what people have referred to as two broad strands, which is there's a strand which views India as being, a civilizational tent, a strand which is more liberal, progressive, tolerant, open to the world, and believes that the more India is inclusive and it's open and learns from everybody from everywhere around the world, the the better the country will become, and that is what India is. The second strand, which believes that India has, in some ways, we have everything we had to learn, we've already learned in the past, and it seems to hearken back to the past rather than look to the future. And the desire for making, country which is uniform by language, religion, politics. And so there are these two competing strands which have over the decades actually always conflicted. And so there is this sort of fundamental problem of what is it to be an Indian, and different people define it different way, whether you fall on one side or fall on the other. And why does it matter? Because we see it in certain, at the end of the day, if you want to be a global power or even a regional power, you need social stability. And for that, I will just give 3 examples. India's had women as prime ministers, women as president. There are women in many arenas in Indian life, and yet there are fewer women in the workforce today than they were in the 1990s. India's female workforce participation is half that of China and half that of the global average. 2, despite sort of having a constitution which is progressive, open, and also socially progressive, India still faces challenges which affect its lower castes, people who are minorities, and sort of, those challenges facing them, discriminations facing them 72 years after independence do demonstrate that at some level, Indian society has still not managed to resolve its intrinsic problems. Why does it matter? Because at the end of the day, the world needs to be comfortable with India's sense of self. And while for domestic reasons and populism may demand that you focus internally and focus on what happened in the past, being a global power means you need to focus on what is going to happen in the future, not on seeking to rewrite or change the past. Coming to other areas, economics and human capital. India's biggest resource is human capital. But as the COVID pandemic has demonstrated, India underinvested in its healthcare, which is visible over the last 9 months. India doesn't have enough primary healthcare. India has not invested in its hospitals, not invested in its doctors, so that they are available everywhere. It's not invested in its testing capability or its research and development. Education. Those countries like the Southeast Asian countries or East Asian countries which invested in education and provided at least basic primary education have done much better than India has done. So education, healthcare, water, sanitation, electricity, basic infrastructure in any cities, India has underinvested in. Research and development. If India seeks to be a global power, let's say China. China has invested around 2%, 2.5% in research and development. The global average is 2%. India's is less than 0.6%. That is not how you build your human capital. Economics. We are the country which sends satellites into space, right? We are a country which has a program by ISRO and NASA can cooperate. And yet, in 7 decades, India has not been able, there is no branded razor or branded fountain pen with an Indian brand. Why is that? 7 decades of poverty alleviation programs. India still, 1/4 of Indians' population is still below the poverty line. 3 decades after the 1990s reforms, where India liberalized, India's economic growth had slowed down to 2 or 3% pre-COVID. Yes, COVID has hit us badly and we've actually gone into a technical recession. But to come out of it and to actually grow at 6%, in order to achieve India's social goals and developmental goals, India needs to grow at 6% at least for 3 decades. There are only 3 countries in the world which have grown at 6% for 3 decades consistently. China, South Korea, and Taiwan. No other country. And India has not managed to keep growing at 6%, even forget about 8%. And for that, India needs economic reforms, which sort of, most people know what those reforms are. A land acquisition, the labor market reforms, financial market reforms, some agriculture, which is happening, but sort of a lot more in agriculture, which is required. Let's turn to military. The size of India's military will make people feel we are a great power. Why? Because there are 1.2 million serving, 2.8 million reserves. India ranks 4th in the global firepower index. But for the last few years, India's military to GDP ratio is 1.6% of its GDP. You
Actually,
cannot, sorry.
sorry, I interrupted. I actually, you have an interesting figure in your book that says $400 billion military equipment deficit. That's a huge deficit.
Yeah, it is. And sort of it is based on the fact that, so if you spend 1.6% of your sort of, military to GDP, but the majority of it, 60% or 63 or 65% goes into salaries and pensions, then the amount that you have left for capital investment, for actually purchasing new equipment, is very little. It's 10%, 15%, maybe 20%, depending on, an average year. If you look at what the Army, Navy, and Air Force need, 2 years ago, at that time, the Vice Chief of Army Staff said that, around 60% of Indian Army's equipment is out of date. And about 10% or 15% is new. Let's say it's gone up to 20%. That's still a massive shortfall for the Indian Army, especially when you have China sitting on the border and the Chinese investment in its army, its navy, and its air force. So there's, 1.6% per GDP or percentage of GDP will not make you forget about a global power, even a regional power right now, because you have to contend against what China is spending and then what Pakistan and the other neighbors are spending. If you want to project power in the region, you need additional equipment. And nowadays, military means not just men, personnel. It means technology. It means equipment. It needs training. And so military, it's not just the resources shortfall. It's also the perception, the belief that, you can buy, or you can sort of, you can react to things as they happen. So when China comes on the border, then you need to purchase equipment, or you need to provide equipment to your personnel. You need to provide resources. You need to provide. Military planning or defense planning is 15, 20, 40, 100 years out. For that India has never done. India does not do that long-range defense planning.
So is that the overarching strategy you're talking about in your book that India lacks?
So my overarching strategy is you need to know where you're going. And, for this, I use actually, something from a childhood favorite. I'm sure you read it also, Alice in Wonderland. In a particular part of the book, Alice meets the cat, and Alice asks the cat, "Where should I go?" The cat says, "Where do you want to go?" Alice says, "I don't know." The cat says, "Then it does not matter." So what I want is, grand strategy means knowing what you want to achieve, and then deciding the direction you need to go. For that, India needs to know what it wants to be. What does India want to be? A regional power, a Asian power, a global power. Depending on that, it will need to invest economic, human capital, military accordingly, and do it 5, 10, 15, 20 years out. Planning is required for, sort of years in advance. Investment is required. And I believe that is what I ask. I ask is plan, decide what do you want to be, and then invest accordingly.
How is India faring in foreign affairs?
So if you look at, how sort of, pure diplomacy, I think India has done quite good in the last few years. There's been a renewed emphasis on, engagements with many parts of the world where India had not really engaged. Part of that has to do with the fact that as India's economy grew in the 90s and 2000s, economic, potential and the belief that India would grow more, and India was a destination for foreign investment, for companies. India sought more energy. India's relations with most of Asia, from Middle East and Gulf to Southeast Asia to Europe and the US also expanded because companies wanted to enter India. There are investors who wanted to come into India, and as India grew, and it appears that India wants to play a global role. countries have wooed India. So there has been diplomacy. India has done a reasonably good job. The problem there again comes back to what does India want? So if for India's leaders going back decades, there's always been this desire for multipolarity, a world where there are a number of countries, not any one country is predominant, and India will be one of the poles in that world. During the Cold War, non-alignment helped India because India was out of the two blocks and it managed to play a role. The world we are living in and the world of the next decade may actually see a continued competition of China and the US. There, the problem India will face is the Cold War, to some extent, India could afford to stay out of. Because neither Soviet Union nor the United States coveted Indian territory. Both of them, sought relations with India. And, even if one supported Pakistan and one supported India, one came into Afghanistan, at some level, they were still they did recognize India as the predominant power in the region. China does not do that. China covets Indian territory, actually is holding on to Indian territory. China is interfering in South Asia to the detriment of India and India's relations. And China does not recognize India as the main power or hegemon in South Asia and Indian Ocean region. So China's rise and the US-China peer competition means that India will need to choose a side. It cannot stay out of it. It cannot balance against it because one power is antithetical to India's rise. So there, I would say, while diplomatically we are doing well, foreign policy does require a little more. Requires building the economy, seeking more investment, becoming part of global supply chains, building our military, and in some ways sending the message to China that India India has allies and India is not going to be browbeaten on the border or anywhere else, and that it is India's neighborhood and India does care and will remain the dominant power in its South Asian Indian Ocean region neighborhood.
You mentioned about China's stand, where it sees India. We know that under President Trump, U.S.-India relations, they both went to each other's countries and they showed support. Under Biden administration, where do you see U.S.-India relations?
So I actually believe that the US-India relationship will grow under President-elect Biden. We can go back 14 years now, 2006. This is soon after the US-India civil nuclear deal was finally passed by the US Congress, House and Senate. And at that time, Senator Biden was one of the Democratic senators who actually helped push that deal. And in 2006, I came across his quote the other day. He said that he believed that by 2020, the India-US relationship will be the defining partnership. And that, he said that, so Democrats have believed, Democratic presidential administrations, but even both, Republicans do, they have last 2 decades, we can see it from President Clinton's time onwards, that there's this belief in Washington that India-US relations are strategic. The rise of India is important and is beneficial for US. Not just economically, militarily, but the fact that a fellow democracy is rising is important. It will also remain important because of the peer competition with China. If there's a peer competition with China and China is the main threat, then which other country in the world has a similar sized population, has China as a neighbor, and views China as a rival? It is India. So in the peer competition or rivalry with China, India will remain important strategically. So I see this relationship as sort of, being as important under the Biden administration as it was under the Trump or the Bush, Obama, Clinton administration. So I don't see any diminishing of the strategic imperative.
Mhm. So we have a few minutes for one more question.
Sure.
I want, you have touched upon several important topics in your book. So what is that one takeaway that you would like the reader to come out with after reading your book?
One takeaway is, I guess it would be that I sort of, if I had, let's say, $100 billion and somebody asked me what would I do with it, I would say invest it in human capital. Because an educated, literate, healthy population is what India needs if you're a country of 1.2 or 1.3 billion people. The more educated, the healthier they are, the more access they have sort of to skills, the faster it will be for India to achieve any of its goals.
On that note, I would say that it was a good discussion, and I would like to thank you for your time, Dr. Pandey. Happy New Year to you. It has been a difficult 2020. Hopefully 2021 might be a little easier on us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jayshal, and thank you to American Bazaar. This is the second book of mine that we had a conversation on, so thank you.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.